models in science is when the original prediction are not met. A good scientist will say, okay, the model is wrong. That's actually a good thing. I understand something new, and move on. What has happened is that the model has been modified so much it ends up in a mess that it's irrefutable. So it's not even science anymore. So the first thing, my question to you would be, I don't know, you're not like a total convert, but one of the very original in the 97 paper, which I read when I was doing my master, was that you wouldn't have myocardial ischemia with the central governor system. But you as a medical doctor, you see myocardial ischemia in the form of angina, for example, clinically, and in the form of ST segment depression. If you do any stress ECG, lots of time. I mean, I think I calculate like 8% of the population has angina. So I mean, it happens all the time. And we're not talking about highly motivated athletes that somehow can overcome the central governor, which is actually also a problem with the theory. I think it shouldn't be possible. There are people that are just doing, maybe going up the stairs. So my question is, how do we reconcile the widespread ischemia with the central governor model? Doing even relatively light exercise,
I think it's
not a maximal effort.
Sam, it's like the question about injury. It's similar to the injury. It's not related to what the model is talking about.
No, the model made a prediction that you cannot have ischemia doing exercise because you have this subconscious system that senses the impeding ischemia, and in order to avoid that, it will recruit the if you're cycling or going up the stairs near my grandpa, they recruit the motor units that innervate the locomotor muscles.
Yeah, but we have silent ischemia. We have different levels of ischemia. There's not something that we include in this specific model. As much as it large, it's not including myocardial ischemia.
I think the answer is that there is no central governor model, and the reason why you have ischemia is because
that's the perfect segue, I think, into your talk.
Yeah, the physiological.
I'll introduce Sam and let him begin his talk.
Oh, sorry.
All the best.
Thank you. Well, because how much time do we have, Andy?
We've got 25 UK, I think.
Okay.
Many people need to leave, don't they?
Yeah. How many people were in the plenary? All of you? Who wasn't? Ah, great. So, I can skip a lot of stuff. I would like to talk though about, because I talk about time to exhaustion, I would like to briefly, because I want to go into the neurophysiology, go into a regulation of time trial performance, which is also different from regulation of head-to-head competition. But when your aim is to cover a certain distance as quick as possible, this is also what Andy shows earlier, the primary physiological model is based on economy, lactate threshold, and efficiency, and you just explain the central governor model, which is, okay, I know for how long I have to go, I sense my physiological condition, and my central governor will start recruiting my locomotor muscle so that I cover that distance at the maximum speed I can do without harming myself. Okay? My proposal is, again, based on standard psychology. No need for a central governor, I already said that. So this is basically how I propose that the pacing is regulated. I actually mentioned the factors regulate pacing, and therefore the performance velocity or power, which is the speed, the average speed, if you like, maintained during on a given distance. These are the 5 factors. So perception of effort, potential motivation, which are the factors that determine time to exhaustion, as I showed you earlier. Of course, previous experience is very important, and knowledge of the race distance, what Tim calls the endpoint, but also knowledge of the distance covered, which is actually something that the central governor says, oh, you will need that because you have an internal clock, subconscious. And I'm going to explain how these things are integrated in order to determine pacing. By pacing, I mean self-regulation of your pace. And by pacing patterns is the U-shaped or negative, positive, these different definition. And by pacing strategy, because the terminology is very confusing. By pacing strategy, I mean the plan that an athlete makes deliberately before a race. For example, he knows I need to, to meet certain time splits or whatever. Or in Tour de France would be even a team pacing strategy over several days. I mean, very complicated. And as you can see, it's like the same parameter, the same final parameter, but all because this is a psychological level, all the parameters that determine that are all psychological. There's no physiology at this level. So let's look at the perceptual effort. You know already we discussed that, and we know that the increase in perceptual effort over time is kind of predictive of basically time to exhaustion. Whether it's an epiphenomenon of muscle fatigue or like you see later a colon discharge or whatever the mechanism, you can predict quite accurately time to exhaustion from the increase in perceptual effort over time. That's been shown many times.
By assumption of perception.
Based on perception of effort, you can predict.
This is like anticipation, basically. This part is
In
anticipation.
a time to exhaustion test, there's no anticipation. The anticipation becomes after. I'll show you that. Just a time to exhaustion at a fixed speed. So you run at a fixed speed, and based on perception of effort, you can calculate. So, and that's based on, as I'll show you, when in my opinion, based on this is an effort-based decision making. When the effort exceeds your potential motivation, or if you're highly motivated, when the effort is perceived to be maximal, therefore continuation of the task impossible, you give up. Importantly, though, is that there is a quite a predictable relationship between intensity and duration, and the two parameters together determine how quickly the perceptual effort increases over time. This is just raw data from a study we've done. And so if you assume that the subject is highly motivated and stops at an RP of 20, because this is a conscious perception, with experience, you form a memory of how perceptual effort varies with exercise intensity duration. So you can make a conscious anticipation of for how long you can keep a certain pace. And actually there has been, but this is a conscious anticipation. It's not a subconscious system that does this calculation and you're unaware of them and then regulates your locomotor muscular recruitment. It's a conscious and therefore messy, often imprecise, it's not, but it's good enough basically. In fact, there are studies using this. It's kind of a modified RP scale. It's called the estimated time limit scale. So they basically ask the subject during a fixed pace, like a time to exhaustion test, to predict for how long they could keep that pace. So when you report something, it means it's conscious. If it's subconscious, you cannot report it. You're not aware. Okay. So this is a conscious anticipatory process, not a subconscious one. And there is a decent correlation between the estimation and improves with experience, but there is a decent. So humans are relatively good at estimating for how long they can keep a certain pace. And surprise, as I predicted here, because I think these are the three determinants of this subjective estimation. There is a very high correlation between the RPE, when you ask the question of for how long you can keep the pace, and the actual estimation of the pace. So based on how you feel now, you will the perception of your current perception of effort, you will make a prediction for about you can keep that pace. So based on perception of effort, let's keep potential motivation constant by assuming these are highly motivated athletes and previous experience. You make a subjective estimation of time to exhaustion at a given pace. However, then you need knowledge of the race distance and also knowledge of the distance covered, because by very simple subtraction, that means that you have knowledge of the distance remaining. And basically, pacing, so the self-regulation of pace, is an attempt. You can either see there are two self-regulation theories in psychology. One is called the kind of cybernetic theory, Carver, etc., where you basically try to match basically the subjective estimation time to exhaustion with for how long you need to keep that pace. I think it's actually this is a subjective estimation time to exhaustion in relation to how much distance is left in the time trial is more akin to self-efficacy. So you make a judgment about basically it's a perceivability to keep that pace or to keep a higher one. And based on that belief, that perceivability, self-efficacy, you decide whether, okay, I can keep this pace, so I continue. Can I keep a higher one? Then you accelerate. But if you think that you cannot keep that pace based on your perception of effort for the rest of the race, then you slow down. Which is actually what you were talking about. You're right. Also, when the example I've shown, it's not that they are exhausted. They don't have an RP of 20 when they start to give up. They anticipate consciously based on the current. Because if in a 10K, if at a 5K I have an RP of 17, 18, I know I know conscious knowledge that I cannot keep that pace for the other 5,000 meters. Okay. So very simple. In fact, there are these. So the Koenig and other they did a lot of data collection on pacing strategy, and they calculated this hazard score is a product of current RP and distance remaining, and which basically is in a mathematical expression what I just said. And there is a good correlation in changes in speed and this integration basically of momentary RP and the distance remaining, as you can see. However, in order to test this hypothesis, we need to test the effects of each experimentally. That's only a correlation. Experimentally, the effects of each of these 5 psychological factors on pacing and low performance. Knowledge of the race distance, I mean, it's almost obvious that people don't even think about it, but we clearly know that we are not going to start a 10K at the same speed of an 800 meters. But is it because we have a subconscious center governo that makes the calculation, oh my God, if I start a marathon at the same pace of 800 meters, I'm going to get in ischemia at like half of the race, and therefore subconsciously regulates my leg muscle so that I go slower? No, it's a conscious anticipation based on experience and based on your perception of effort, because at the beginning of the race, the distance remaining is the endpoint. So you, based on previous experience, you set up, actually with deliberate practice, it may become quite automatic, you don't have to think too much about it, but it's based on deliberate practice and conscious knowledge of the distance that you have to cover. This, importantly though, because this is against the central governor considerably, is that if you don't have feedback about the distance cover, or in a time-based time trial, the time elapsed, what you always see is that there's no expert. Because over time perception and by the result of distance perception is very, very imprecise. When we rely on our own perception of time and distance to regulate ourselves, would you be able to know in a 30-minute time trial when it's the 29th minute, based on your own perception of time? No. I mean, even with in fact, all the study perception of time are based on kind of milliseconds or hundreds of milliseconds, yeah? Because longer time is really completely inaccurate. But when you have a clock, for example, or in a distance-based time trial, when you have like a odometer, the lap time, whatever, then you know that the endpoint is near, that you calculate the distance remaining, and as a result, you have an answer. Perception of effort and also previous experience, just a study that I did. For previous, this is a control group. So pre-test and post-test, you can see that people, I think it's more to do with self-confidence here. So in the second time trial, they were able to increase their speed. So that shows that experience may have an effect. But also here, this is the effects of exercise-induced muscle damage, which we know increases perception of effort. So based on that, in order to not reach maximal effort before the end of the time trial, you slow down. So based on perception of effort, you go at a lower pace, so that you basically, and this is what you see with all time trials. Perception of effort never changes. At the actual RP, what changes is the selection of speed. In order to maintain this increase in perception of effort compatible with finishing the race. Because if you reach 20 at half race, no matter how quick you go, if you don't finish the race, there's no point. So the primary goal really is to actually finish the race. Potential motivation, there's not much evidence. Here they gave them on the fourth trial, was not even randomized, but on the fourth trial they give them a monetary incentive, and that didn't induce an improvement in time trial performance. But I think the reason is because these were competitive cyclists. In order to motivate them, which I think goes actually against the experiment, I don't know why they did it, they did a ranking that all participants were, saw basically what was their ranking, so they were highly motivated to compete with each other. So giving them the extra 100 pounds did not increase further their motivation. I think this is why it failed. Okay, I want to talk about the biological level, which I didn't almost touch earlier. Oops. So basically there are these two models. The one which is actually strongly associated with the central governor, which is the so-called afferent feedback model of perceptual effort. So the idea is that perceptual effort comes from processing of the central governor of information coming from, for example, the heart or the respiratory system, or from the active muscles, as you can see here. And we, okay, you should know, if not, I'll tell you why the Borg-Appeal scale go from 6 to 20. Because when they did do incremental exercise in 20 years old, there was a strong correlation between RP and an heart rate, and multiply by 10, you get 60 to 200 in 20 years old. It's pretty accurate. There is also a nice afferent pathway from the heart to the brain. So it looks, it should be, believable that the afferent feedback from the heart contributes to RP. However, this is correlational evidence, it's not experimental. When you experimentally manipulate, for example, heart rate, like here we're using beta blockers, you have for the same workload, you have a significant reduction in heart rate. So if heart rate was one of the sensory input to perceptual effort, you would expect a less. Same. If anything, high, a bit high. What about the muscles? Muscle, as we know, they have a lot of receptors. With reference to the central governor model and the afferent feedback model of perceptual effort, the group 3 and 4 afferents are the most relevant because they are sensitive to a lot of parameters, including lactic acid, temperature, they're also mechanoreceptor, but they are the ones that kind of sense the metabolic stress, if you like, of the muscle. There are very nice pathways, well described. So the machinery is there. There is a high correlation between heart rate and, blood lactate and RP. So again, everybody thinks, okay, that's the sensory neurophysiology. No, this is a correlation. Again, if you manipulate experimentally the sensory information, in this case by blocking the afferent feedback from the legs to the brain at spinal level with an epidural, by an epidural done in a way that doesn't impair too much motor function, so you can actually cycle for 20 minutes at 50% V2 max, you would expect a reduction, in RP. Actually, it goes up. And the reason is, well, I'll tell you later. Another study done by Gandevia group, they injected in the muscle saline versus, so hypertonic saline versus non-hypertonic saline, and the hypertonic saline stimulates those group 3 and 4 receptors, induces a lot of pain, as you can see here. So it goes up to 5, which is, it stings. Yeah. However, and this was good because it didn't have it could have, but it didn't have an effect on motor neuron excitability or cortical excitability. So there was no impairment in strength. So what they did, they used a force production method, effort production method to measure perception of effort, and perception of effort was not affected whatsoever. Which also shows very clearly that sensation of pain, sensation of effort are two completely different sensations mediated by two completely different neurophysiological pathways. Pain, yes, afferent feedback. Perception of effort, no. So what's the alternative then? Where does it come from? As I said earlier very quickly, it seems that perception of effort comes from is a calorie discharge of activity of premotor and motor areas. So when we send this central motor command to the motor neuron innervated skeletal muscle, a copy of that signal is sent to somatosensory areas, where it's processed and translated into perception of effort. However, there is a lot of indirect evidence, including the epidural. As I said, there was about 20% reduction in strength. And the reason why RP was higher is because in order to overcome the partial motor block at spinal level, they had to increase the central motor command in order to get the same final muscle recruitment and therefore the same work output on the bike. However, there hasn't been any direct neurophysiological data to correlate central motor command with perception of effort, and that's what we did. We used a technique that's been used a lot in cognitive neuroscience, but the kind of movement that they do is like moving the finger. It's called motor-related cortical potential, so you complicate it, but you measure EEG, you do a lot of processing, averaging, and you extract the motor activity, the brain activity related to movement, basically. And we did two experimental manipulations. One was 2 different weights, so it could be 2 different submaximal weights, of course. Could be 2 different intensities, basically. But also, we pre-fatigued one of the arms with eccentric contractions. And we asked the person to lift the same weight with the fatigue and non-fatigued arm. So there was different fatigue, as you can see here. The combination of intensity and fatigue induced 4 different levels of perception of effort, as you can see here. And this is brain activity, the motor-related cortical potential. So if you're not familiar with this measure, 0 is the onset of, EMG, but let's say muscle contraction, okay? So this it's called the readiness potential, is the brain activity before the muscle contraction. It's about planning, etc. The muscle contraction was really lift because you have to control for head movement and stuff. You just lifted basically the weight off the floor and down. So it was a 2-second contraction time. As you can see, they were clearly as expected. That's why we did the study. It was like we did something quite straightforward first, because we had, as expected, the fatigue condition, which is the red, means you have to increase your central motor command in order to lift the same weight, and also the 2 weights are different. And this activity correlates significantly with perception of effort. Importantly, though, that's we measure brain activity, not heart or lactate, but still is a correlation. There is also now some direct neurophysiological experimental evidence using this kind of repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, where you basically perturb the activity of different areas of the brain, specifically the primary motor cortex, the SMA, the supplementary motor area, the primary motor cortex precuneus as a control condition. And they it's published in Journal of Neuroscience. This is solid evidence. And they measure effort in different ways, including behavioral. But what's interesting for us is the RPE. So both manipulation SMA and M1, primary motor cortex, actually reduce perception of effort. So there is direct evidence that manipulating the activity of this area in an experimental way changes perception of effort. Also the anterior cingulate cortex, which is an area of the brain which studied a lot in cognitive neuroscience in terms of effort-based decision making. It's an area associated with also in cognitive tasks, but it's also a motor area. It inputs into the paramotor cortex and also directly to the motor neurons. And there is evidence that also is implicated with perception of effort. In this case, there's an imaging study where they hypnotized people. So they were cycling at the same exercise intensity. They hypnotized them, suggestion, that they were going uphill, flat, or downhill. They were doing exactly the same exercise though. Okay? And that caused, it was successful, it induced 3 levels of perception of effort. And this psychological manipulation and change in perception of effort correlated with among the insult was also, but the anterior cingulate cortex was one of the areas that correlated the most with this change in perception. And again, importantly, there is experimental evidence that this area is associated with effort-based decision making. So if you damage with poison or electrical devices the anterior cingulate cortex in a mouse, the mouse basically becomes lazy. Normally, a mouse in a T maze, so as a choice, it can go right or left. Right, there is more cheese, but he has to go over a physical barrier, so he has to exert more effort in order to get more cheese. A normal mouse goes right most of the time. A mouse with the damaged ACC tend to go left. So it becomes